All right, let's go over to the next crime family that you wrote about in Gangster Warlords then. And I'd never even heard of these people. The Red Commando in
Mm.
Brazil. Who are they? How did they get formed? What are they up to?
So the Red Commander in Brazil, in Portuguese called Comando Vermelho. This is one of the big gangs, the biggest drug trafficking organization in Rio de Janeiro, and they spread around Brazil. And obviously, Brazil is another big case of violence right now. You got the president there, Bolsonaro. So again, another big hotspot. One of the biggest cocaine consumer markets in the world, actually, is Brazil as well.
Mm.
After the United States, I mean, people in one of the, and maybe the biggest place total for consumption of crack cocaine.
Is it?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people using cocaine, using crack in Brazil.
Is that because of the population size
The
then?
population's big, and there's there is it is a big middle class as well, and with crack, a lot of the poor people using crack as well. So with the one of the interesting things about the Red Commando is that they have this weird kind of rhetoric, which is a bit political, like a bit like we're like rebels, we're guerrillas, we're not just drug dealers, we're against the government, we're. So I was kind of wondering how come that came about, and they're like super organized, and it's amazing. Brazil is one of the places they're most open. Like I went to this one favela in Brazil called Antares, and I went on there, and when they have these spies everywhere, people, all across Latin America, you have spies who are going to watch you, who comes in, get on a radio, report, whatever. In Brazil, they're just totally open. Just walk in there, sitting in a radio with a gun, just like half asleep, like, yeah, coming. When you walk in openly, the guys are openly with, like, they're selling drugs off tables, like right there, like off a table, and you can buy, if you want to buy cocaine, crack, prices right there. When we first when I went in there, like, hey, the they, and the totally open, and then walking around. This is first in the daytime. We're in this favela, and the guy pulls up on a motorbike. One of them's got like a AR-15 with a grenade launcher on it. It's completely open. When we went back in the night, like the Friday night, to a party there. We went in the night and out at dawn and stayed the whole night at a party there, which was like a big sound system. Everyone, loads of people with guns, and they started dancing with their guns, like, and it was kind of and it was funny. The party it's the music they call funk, like favela funk. They call it funk. It doesn't sound like funk. It sounds more like a weird kind of electro.
Mm.
The reason it's called funk music is that back in the 70s, they started getting funk records from the United States. So they were called funk parties. But gradually the music like mutated, and it was like, own like, so kind of hard electronic beats, kind of weird, kind of rapping and singing.
Like the sound of that.
Yeah, it's kind of, and it reminded me a bit. I used to go to some like old school jungle parties in London back in the early 90s. It reminded me of some of these old, like sound wise, it's like distorted speakers, the kind of beats coming off these distorted speakers. But they kind of created it, and everyone was like dancing to these songs. They had a song like Red Commando. They have some they a type, like a subgenre of the funk called funk proibido, or however they pronounce it in Portuguese. My Portuguese is not great. Like prohibited funk, banned funk, and they have songs directly in favor of the drug trafficking organization, like the Red Commando. Now the story of them, and I went to find one of the founding members of this organization, a guy called the Teacher.
How did you get access to him?
I found him. He'd been in prison most of his life. He'd gone as a bank robber. I found an older Brazilian journalist who had been during a dictatorship, a kind of left wing journalist during a dictatorship, and he knew the guy. He took me to meet him. He still had one of those the things on his ankle brace, ankle bracelet. He still had that even though he was in his 70s. And he'd been in prison most of his life. He's now like on the release with that. And we talked to him about when they were formed originally. And it went back to the 1970s when you had the military dictatorship in Brazil. And you had these like left-wing guerrillas at the time who were fighting the government, and they were like really political. And the government said, "Oh, let's put them in prison with the bank robbers and the ghetto criminals, and that'll teach them a lesson. They're going to beat them and rape them and like demoralize them." But the opposite happened. The criminals started going, "All right, these guys have got a good thing going," and started getting like organized, like they were a guerrilla group, and this kind of spread, and it became the Red Commando. This kind of idea of like. Then eventually there was like a peace treaty in Brazil, and the political prisoners went out, but the ghetto criminals stayed with the same ideology. They even had like a manifesto at one point. It was kind of rules of being a good criminal, basically. But this guy, William, the teacher, he would like have, when I would talk to him, he had this this idea of himself as kind of a social bandit. He'd read a lot of books in jail, like I think you did yourself, yeah. But yeah,
Karl Marx and stuff like that.
He had like a lot of kind of more these romantic ideas of Brazil, very particular to Brazil. These kind of tales of that. But some of the stuff happening in the prison violence there, obviously in Brazil, is crazy, and they're very clearly. The prisons there are segregated very clearly by group. You've got wings that are Red Commando, wings that they're controlled by their enemies. In Sao Paulo, you've got another group called the PCC, the First Commando of the capital, inspired by the Red Commando. But they're like a really powerful group, and they control the prisons, the favelas of Sao Paulo, like a really big area. And they shut the whole city down, for a while. They were like, one time, it was all a pressure kind of thing they were doing. So yeah, very, very powerful gangs behind a lot of this violence that have come from this. Now in Brazil as well, I talked to one of the police officers who was fighting the gangs. And when I was talking to him, I said, have you been in many shootouts? And he said, oh yeah, I've got a bullet embedded in the back of my head. And he said, like, I've been in thousands of shootouts. Every time they go into favela, they go in there and they exchange fire. It's like constant, like back and forth. Now, when I was there, he said, oh yeah, the Navy SEALs, the US Navy SEALs are down here. I said, oh, what, they're training you? He said, no, the opposite. They come here to learn from us, because these Brazilian elite police units have so much experience in this close urban combat, really, really close, having these really close firefights with criminals, that the Navy SEALs want to get that knowledge themselves when they're thinking about Fallujah and these kind of battles around the world.
So with the Red Commando then, how is it structured now, and what is their code of conduct?
So you have to structure the level of the favela. So the favela is a ghetto, but like you have a certain area of a ghetto, and it might be a place with 30,000 people living there. And in one favela, you've got a leader, a boss of that favela. So he's the boss at the local level. And that comes similar to a lot of these gangs. In Mexico, you have the head of the plaza, who's the head of a territory there for a cartel. In the gangs of El Salvador, you have the head of a clique, who's the head of that territory. So they have the head of the favela. They have, again, this is very similar between different gangs around Latin America. So when comparing these things, you find the same features. You have people who are like the people who are watching. You have the soldiers, the armed wing. You have the people running the drug business. Now, it's quite easy to see at a local level these structures. It's harder sometimes to understand how they really work at a national level, because they were doing, they were involved in bringing drugs through that ended up in Europe. They're involved in bringing guns to the FARC rebels in Colombia in exchange for cocaine. One thing that some of these guys talked about was in the prisons is where the command would be, because people arrested from these different battles always end up in these prisons, and that's where they'd have command structures inside the prisons. But they were saying it was more about it was like a group of the leaders, but rather than having an official leader, it was more about who had the most convincing arguments among this kind of this top level of the organization.
So there's a democracy amongst the shot callers.
Yeah. I think that's similar with the Mexican mafia. they have their own, like, I think it's like made members. I don't know if they have a single, kind of various made members, and they have. I'm not sure. You know more about how
The
that
prison
works.
gangs, they have their own charters. On Arizona Department of Corrections website, it's got like the charter for the Aryan Brotherhood, the charter for the old Mexican Mafia, the charter for the new Mexican Mafia, and then all the different rankings and how you earn your tattoos and all that kind of stuff. Generally, the leaders of the prison gangs are in the super maximum security. The idea was put them all in there and they can't run this, but they just send word out through trustees and other means, visitors. So each yard, someone holds the keys for each yard for the shot callers, and the commands come down from the gang leaders and they do the enforcement at the yard level. That's how it works. Yeah. Did you, there was a news story recently, was it a Brazilian prison where about 40 people died in a riot?
Yeah, that was, that's correct. That was like what's happened now is these commandos have spread. And that was, I believe, a local gang that had formed, like the gang spread against an affiliate of the Red Commando in that state. And that was what the fighting there was about. But like,
so there was an affiliate of the Red Commando in that prison.
Yeah,
and who were they fighting?
Like a local commando that had formed, or a local gang that had formed, drug trafficking gang. So like when they kind of, because they were the Red Commando were the kind of first of these kind of commandos, and then they spread around like Brazil, and somebody would get like transferred to different state. This kind of word of them spread around, and people. But William was saying as well that they came in a way as an answer to the craziness inside the Brazilian prison system, because it's one of their very, very big prison system. You've got like over 500,000 prisoners. A lot of very, very violent, crazy situations. They were saying like before the commandos, you could get killed over a scrap of bread. So they kind of created a bit of an order there in the prisons. And that's a lot of how they kind of began, so that they're both they can both cause violence, but also limit the violence. And like in Sao Paulo, where they've got a monopoly in the prisons and the favelas, violence has gone down. So, there's kind of a weird things there, but parts of Brazil, there's still like a lot of conflict between their affiliates or new affiliates and other people, fighting over territory.
So for 40-something people to die in a prison, that's an extreme situation.
Yeah.
There are riots and the fights over drugs between drug gangs constantly. Why do you think it went to such an extreme in this situation? 40-something people dead?
I mean, you've seen that, I mean, repeatedly around prisons in Latin America, though, that those numbers of that kind of thing. And this gets into that thing of prisons being very segregated among gangs becoming powers within the prisons, controlling areas, and then they kind of riot and break into the section of another gang and then go in there to commit massacres. Now, one time I was in a prison in Honduras, in San Pedro Sula, and I got into the prison there with a local journalist friend, a guy called Orlin Castro, who's a great guy. And we got in there, we arrived, and we talked our way to get in there, really without a set permission. And the perimeter of the prison was a bunch of military and police. Once we got in, it was under the control of the inmates. We were completely at their mercy. So we got in, it was quite a crowded prison. Now we were in a section which was, there was an MS-13 section, there was a 18, Barrio de there's a section we were in, they were not one of those gangs, but they were part of a big structure of organized crime known there as bandas, who are actually, they're very big and responsible for a lot of murders. So we went in there, and Orlin, luckily, he knew these people. They respected him. He was a local cop reporter. They saw him on the TV, and he's just a very, very charismatic guy. So everyone was like, "Oh, Orlin." So one of the first things I was like seeing were these crazy fighting dogs in the prison. I was like getting these like dogs like trying to grab the back of my leg. I was like, and they got like these crazy fighting dogs, and they have like actually fights with the dogs in the prison. then people's like girlfriends are in there, like wives and girlfriends, something like wearing like, like scantily dressed, like in the prisons, like, I'm in prison, what? They're like, we got some food. They're like, what do you want to eat? They're like, went to the boss in the prison in this area, where the inmate, and he said, he ordered some food for us because they got to make it. And there was a situation right then in the prison that there'd been a guy who was the head of that wing before. And one of the crazy things he did, there was somebody challenged him for his dominance of the wing. And he hacked the guy's head off and threw the head over the wall to where the guards were. That was his like way of like showing dominance in this prison wing. So then this guy who'd been the boss there had come out, he'd left prison and he'd been murdered by MS-13. And there were these weird murals of him in the prison. They were like, said, this guy was like an amazing guy. He was like, there was murals of him they were doing. But because there was this big tension with the MS-13, so when I was in there, it was like about to go off with the MS-13. So there was, where the MS-13 wing was, there was people crowding around, like loads of guys, like crowding around a door, waiting if they tried to storm the wing. And they had, like some of these guys, they had Uzis. And it was like, it's like you're seeing right Uzi in a prison sitting there, like, with Uzis there. And this is like, it's a completely bizarre, surreal environment. And I was sitting there and I said to Ioan, I said, what's the best thing to do if it kicks off? And he said, probably best to hide under a bed. So, now it didn't kick off, but I was like, this is about to go. And I think it was about 10 days afterwards, it kicked off there. There was a big raid. The police went in there. A bunch of people there was shootings, and they raided through and took loads of guns and stuff out. Didn't take the dogs out. They left the dogs inside.
Are you an adrenaline junkie, Ioan? Did you know it was going to be like that when you went in? There was going to be a degree of risk.
Well, obviously, yeah. When you go into these things, I guess, yeah. I guess probably I like adrenaline from doing these things. The weird thing is when you're around it, a lot of these stories sound crazy. When you're doing them, it kind of sees a normality around it. I like doing this reporting. I get weird about it as well. I think it is an important story to tell as well. I mean, I think, it is, there is a real interest in going there and finding these things. I think this is, for me, there's a lot of journalism today. I mean, a lot of people are fed up with journalists. We have a bad name. A lot of people are fed up with journalists talking about a lot of things that people don't see as being relevant to their lives. I think these things are real stories that can be relevant to people. So I think there's a good reason behind it. But yeah, I mean, yeah, sure. I guess there is that with doing reporting in kind of conflict situations. Yeah, I can't lie. There's obviously an attraction to that as well.